So, this evening's program, which it is my honor to introduce, is Mapping the Human Experience with Brian Fu. Brian is a data visualization artist at the American Museum of Natural History, who constructs multisensory digital maps that center on specific human experiences and end up broadening the definition of landscape art. In this talk, inspired by the exhibition Landscape Art and Virtual Travel, Brian Fu shares the innovative approaches he employs in his digital media landscapes, which facilitate interactions with the past, the present, and the future, and allow us to understand the world in new ways. For example, when you visit brianfu.com and later on in the program, you'll see his innovative projects, including the sound of movement, where you can really virtually drag your cursor across a map of the United States that's constructed of spliced video and audio footage of protests in each state after the killing of George Floyd. And somehow the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. I want to offer our thanks to Art Bridges for so generously supporting this unique program, which we anticipate will run approximately 1 hour, about Brian's groundbreaking practice. A few notes before we get started. Your microphones have been muted upon entry, but you can control your video camera. We've also enabled closed captioning for your convenience. Should you have questions for the speaker, you are invited to type them in the chat, and they'll be moderated by myself and my colleague, HRM Manager of School Programs, Bridget McCormick, who will also be providing links to relevant resources in the chat throughout the program, and who will now introduce this evening's speaker. Bridget.
Thanks, Sarah Linda, and welcome everybody. I'm going to read a little bit more about Brian from his bio and share a little bit about how we're connected from a past work experience as well. But we're really glad you're here. And as Sarah Linda said, Brian Fu is an artist and he's a computer scientist. He lives and works in Washington, D.C. and also in New York City. And his work focuses on making public resources such as audio-visual collections, scientific data sets, and cultural objects more accessible and remixable for the general public. So you'll see some examples of what we mean by remixable. And he does this through visualization, sonification, immersion, and play. And I think you'll likely see what we mean by play through some of the examples of Brian's work we're going to see tonight. That's one of my favorite things about it. He takes a very public approach to his work, where he openly documents his creative and technical decisions, as well as shares his tools, software, and assets for others to copy, extend, and adapt. So the things that you're going to see tonight are things that you can actually be a part of yourself, contribute to, engage with beyond just seeing them on your screen. So as Sarah Linda mentioned, he's a data visualization artist currently at the American Museum of Natural History, where he's communicating scientific data and research through interactive digital and physical exhibits. Some of Brian's past experiences and accolades include that he was the 2020 Innovator of Residence at the Library of Congress, where he worked on making it easier to make hip hop music using free to use audio from the library. He combined music, data, and algorithms as the data-driven DJ. Something that I know about Brian just through working with him is that he tries to be a better friend and colleague by using art, technology, and joy. And this is how I know Brian is through our work at the New York Public Library. We overlapped there several years ago in different departments, but towards shared goals around access and ease of use and ease of understanding of library collections, special collections, and materials for all audiences. And that was how I got to know him. So I'm really glad we got to reconnect through this program. Again, one of my favorite things about Brian's work is the focus on access and making not just the materials more understandable on a day-to-day level, but on this fun level. And the technical aspects of these projects, again, are also open source, which means that the tools that were made to create them can be replicated. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Brian, and we'll see some demonstrations of some of the projects we've outlined above. Again, please keep an eye on the chat because I'm going to be dropping links into the chat as we talk about specific things, so you can refer to them later and or look at them on your own screen at home simultaneously while we're looking at them through the demonstrations. So Brian, please.
All right, thank you, Bridget. Thank you, Sarah Linda, for that really generous introduction. Yeah, I just want to really reiterate, it'd be great to have this as interactive as possible. So I'd love to hear or see your questions via the chat, and hopefully we'll dedicate a good amount of this talk to answering some of your questions. I also would like to maybe start with if people just want to drop in the chat, like either their background, what they do for a living, or their just area of interest. It could be like education or photography, or just to get a sense of like who I'm talking to. I also generally like to kind of tailor the specific topics to the audience. So if you want to try to do that, that'd be great. Okay, we have architect.
You can see that. Okay, architect.
Okay. Okay, I'll assume I'm talking to all architects here. Okay. Video editor. All right.
Okay.
Teaches geography. Great. Cool.
Oh, nice.
Wow. Okay. So this is very diverse crowd. Okay, cool. So we have like educators. We have makers of various kinds, people in the arts, museums. Okay, cool. All right. So yeah, that it's kind of like all over the place. So I don't really know how to kind of tailor it specifically, but I mean, it's good to know that there's a really good diverse audience here, that I could kind of speak very broadly about particular topics. Cool. All right, so I'm just gonna get started. Most of my presentation will be demoing via a web browser. I like to do this because I just want to kind of reiterate that all my work is public. This entire presentation will be literally me clicking around on links that you can access at any time, either during or after this presentation. And I really kind of selected a couple projects I want to talk about that that I chose, as after kind of I got to know the exhibit and the kind of the themes behind it. So I'm going to try to focus this presentation on projects that really explore this idea of different types of maps, landscapes, and different ways of exploring cultural material through space and time. And I'm going to do this through the lens of both work I've done professionally, at various institutions, but also some personal work that kind of complemented some of those professional works. So I'll just get started. So yeah, so this is just my website. So you could kind of click through to find all the different projects that I'm going to talk about via this particular website. But I'll just jump to this. So I'm going to start just by giving a kind of a brief how I got here type of description. So my background is in computer science and visual arts. And for most of my life, those two worlds were pretty separate from each other. I didn't really kind of combine those two things until I worked at the New York Public Library. And this was, I guess, like 10 years by now, 10 years ago. And, this is where I was really able to kind of combine those two worlds, computer science, the arts, through digital humanities, or I guess you could consider like data science, information science, really just thinking about how to access and make new things from the library's vast collections of materials. So one of kind of the more ambitious projects that we worked on at the New York Public Library, this was as a part of a group called Labs, which unfortunately no longer exists, but our group tried to think about how the library can achieve its mission in the age of, in kind of the digital age, the age in which people kind of access information differently, they make things differently. A lot of people expect things to be available online, and for people expect to kind of be able to kind of take things and remix them, make new things, documentaries, various like installations, things like that. So we did this project around trying to identify what items in our collections, in our vast research collections, can and should be made available to the public because they're in the public domain. And this is kind of like a harder thing, even from just like, even if you're not thinking about the technical point of view, even just doing the due diligence of trying to find the provenance of each item and making sure that what data was created in or who owns it, and what rights we might have in terms of sharing it. So this was like a multi-department project where we worked with like the legal team, the various collection managers in the library, to really just identify all the things that we have available at the library for the public to use and reuse for free without restriction. This ended up being hundreds of thousands of items. The library did the work to not only digitize these things, but also to make them available online through a public website, as well as through an API, which is, in computer science terms, it's basically a way for other people to automatically kind of access your data or your kind of materials to kind of produce new things. So this visualization that you see here is hundreds of thousands of items that you can use and reuse from the New York Public Library. Right now, these are grouped by the date in which they were created. So you could see, the bulk of the stuff is from the 19th century. You could also view it by genre. So we have this very gigantic stereoscopic collection, which is pretty cool. Tens of thousands of items. We have a lot of menus. These are maps, and a lot of these are maps of various places in New York City. Prints, and then you could also kind of do things like sort it by color. And yeah, this is just a visualization just that I produced to really just, I wanted to understand like what it is that we're releasing to the public, and just like a very high level view of what it is. And you could almost see it, it almost seems kind of like a landscape of cultural material and cultural heritage. So one of the collections that was released through this public domain release was called the Green Book collection. So folks probably heard about this through the movie that was released, I don't know, like a few years ago. We did this project actually several years before that movie, so a lot of people were not aware of this collection. And for those of you who aren't, this is a collection of travel guides that were published between the 1930s and 1960s that essentially helped Black travelers navigate the United States, telling them where it was safe and welcoming to eat, to stay at, to get your gas at. And the New York Public Library has the largest collection of these books because they had the foresight to start to collect these things as they're being published in the early 20th century. And we made these books available for you to view online. So I'll just quickly do that. So most of them are digitized. I'm not sure if all of them are digitized. Let me just go back. Okay. Sorry, one second. So what we tried to do was, these books were digitized and put online, but they're not really that useful as images. So if I just open a random one here, it's basically like listings. So these are just text showing specific addresses of particular places, businesses, things like that. And what we wanted to do is try to extract that information. So extract kind of the geographic information out of the green books and try to visualize it in ways in which people can get a better understanding of the content. So the first thing that we did was just kind of put it on a map. So this is data from the 1947 book. So it's a little better as a heat map. So this kind of gives you a sense of where the particular places of business were in this particular book. So you could see that there was kind of clusters in kind of the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area, the Midwest, the South, and there's a lot of kind of gaps in other parts of the United States. This doesn't really answer many questions. It kind of just allows you to ask certain questions. Why were there particular gaps on certain years? And another year, there's different coverage. And what we wanted to do was to really try to think about how we can kind of get the user kind of more, try to encourage a little more kind of empathy into like what was the experience like for somebody using these books in the early 20th century. So what we did was we created this very simple interface that allows you to enter like two addresses. So one as a address of origin. So I could just do like Florida, Los Angeles. And it basically tries to map a trip using the green books. So there's like some basic logic here. So it tries to determine, it tries to, you have to like eat every so often and then you have to sleep every so often. So it tries to find like lodgings, once a day, and it tries to find a restaurant, like every 6 hours or something like that. And it tries to map a trip for you. So in this particular route where you're trying to get from Florida to California, you have to do these kind of very inefficient routes. In this case, kind of going around mostly Texas to get to your destination. And then you have this really long stretch where you can't really stay anywhere or stop anywhere using the Green Book. So, this kind of really just starts to make you think about the particular, experiences that one would have at a different time with a different color skin, And, unfortunately, a lot of this stuff is still, relevant. But, for any of these particular addresses, you can click through to where it is in the actual Green Book. So yeah, so this is like, I think this project really got me thinking about, yeah, how can we use various technology, techniques, interfaces that are very familiar to people. In this case, like a map or a kind of a trip planner. These are kind of things that are very familiar to us, but kind of when used, when you kind of juxtapose it with like kind of topics like this and collections like this, it creates kind of like a new understanding and a kind of a new connection to some of these materials in which it might be a little difficult to kind of do that as like a simple kind of image of a book in this case. So I'm going to kind of jump ahead to a personal project that I did around the same time. And the Green Book project really kind of informs my personal work. And my personal work tends to be a little more, I guess, like creative, kind of like less, maybe a little less intellectual, but more kind of like felt, and not necessarily about kind of creating tools for people to, access materials. I kind of use my personal time to actually remix some of those materials myself. So in this case, I wanted to do this project around creating music using various public data sets that are available, usually through like the census and various kind of public places. So 1 second. Okay. So this project, it ended up being 10 songs, and each song corresponds to a different data set. And I tried to kind of think broadly about different types of data sets to work with, and think kind of critically about what type of song might be appropriate for a particular data set, because my background was in visualization. I haven't really worked on sonification or it's kind of foundation. You're kind of familiar with things like charts, graphs, maps are pretty popular. So there's very there's kind of very well documented techniques for visualization, but not so much for sonification. And I was also interested in not necessarily just turning data into sound, but also data into music. And I wanted to do this because I think music has this special quality that it really invokes a visceral reaction, and in some cases kind of an emotional reaction. And music is very accessible and very kind of sticky. You get melodies stuck in your head, but it's hard to think of a time where you got kind of like a graph stuck in your head or something like that. So I think there's something very special about music, even though it might not be as efficient as like a graph or a chart. It might do something different. So I'll just kind of show this one example. So this song, it uses US Census data. I use data, the median household income of the different neighborhoods along the 2 train. So for those familiar, or for those not familiar with the New York City subway, the 2 train is one of the few lines that go through 3 boroughs. It goes from the Bronx through Manhattan into Brooklyn. It has a particularly high income inequality in terms of, it goes through Wall Street. So, it goes from, in that case, it's over $250,000 median household income in the financial district. And just like 5 miles away, if you go to, the South Bronx, the median household income is somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000. So, so there's kind of this massive, income inequality along the 2 train. And I wanted to think about how I could translate this into song. So I'm just going to start by just playing a little bit of it, and then I'll kind of talk about my particular decisions. Let's adjust my volume. Okay. So we're going to start. So in this case, we're starting in Brooklyn. So the song right now is very quiet because what I did was I made the median household income of the neighborhood that you're passing through correspond to the number of instruments and how loudly they're playing. So the song right now is very soft because the median household income in this particular part of Brooklyn is a bit lower. But as we get closer to the bridge, passing Grand Army Plaza, the song starts to swell. This is because the income is going a little higher. And then we're going to cross the bridge into Manhattan. So this is where kind of the song crescendos in the financial district. And then it'll stay pretty loud. Let me just skip ahead a little bit. So we're going to pass the Upper West Side. I'm going to cross over to Harlem. And then the song drops off again. And then it's quietest as we kind of get to the South Bronx. So I just want to clarify that this song was completely algorithmically generated. So I didn't manually compose this song. I basically took the data and I kind of ran it through, software that I wrote that basically I basically tell it the rules of how to map the data to sound, and then the song is produced. So I didn't kind of manually manipulate any part of the song. I really had to just think about what are the rules that govern the particular sounds that you hear at any given time. And, this particular data set was very tricky because, when you're talking about income inequality or, specific neighborhoods in which people, real people live in, I think it's prudent to be sensitive and responsible, even from a creative point of view of how you might produce a song. In this case, or in the case of music, you evoke emotion, you might evoke a particular mood. So, I could have made a rule saying that like wealthier areas might sound happier, and or I might have used like better quality sounds or something like that. But that probably wouldn't have, that didn't really fit the message that I wanted. All I really wanted to for the listener to hear was the contrast. So what I want to do is just translate the contrast, the kind of the massive changes of income that are along the New York City subway. I want to translate into the contrasts and changes of the song itself. So any of kind of the contrasts and crescendos and kind of the softer parts of the song, that's all part of kind of the data and then the overall theme of income inequality, getting the listener to essentially kind of feel what income inequality sounds like. Just to kind of give another view of this data, I did this other visualization. So this is using the same data. So this is census data. I could just highlight the two train here. So this is essentially a graph of median household income along the two train, but I'm just putting it on top of a subway map. So here you could actually see where the peaks are. And this only dips down because that's where you cross the bridge. So this is where this is the financial district here. This is the Upper West Side. No, this is Midtown, and it goes down. And this is Harlem. So this kind of gives you kind of like the same concept. It kind of almost looks like a roller coaster. So you could kind of imagine, riding the graph in this case. But here you can look at any of the subway lines. If anybody takes the subway, you can kind of see what your line looks like. And they're usually all pretty wacky like this. Simply anything that kind of goes between boroughs or through downtown, you'll kind of have these pretty dramatic shifts. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Oh, and yeah, feel free to check out the other data-driven DJ songs. A couple of them have to do with space and kind of movement like that, but I wanted to kind of show a few other projects as well. So this project I made in 2020. I believe Sarah Linda or Bridget mentioned it in the introduction, but this is a project called The Sound of Movement. This was in response to the protests the protests that happened across the country in response to the killing of George Floyd. And I don't know, I was really kind of moved by, kind of just the sheer volume of protests and the fact they're happening everywhere. But, it's kind of hard to really just get an understanding of the scale of those protests. So I tried to use kind of a multi-sensory approach to this, but primarily I think the sound aspect is what kind of makes it kind of compelling. So I'm going to turn my volume down a little bit because this might get a little loud. So what you can do here is I might need to refresh in a second. Okay. So basically, I'm going to drag my cursor around the United States here. So each state there's a protest that was documented that I accessed using Twitter, and I kind of spliced them all together. So what you can do is you can drag your cursor around and just listen to all the different protests that happened in the span of a couple weeks. So, I mean, I would recommend using, experiencing this with like headphones on, because, I mean, you're never going to replace the feeling of being in the actual place with a protest, but it's hard to even get even close to that with just visuals of some of the protests. I think sound gets a little closer to kind of feeling that scale, and especially if you kind of have headphones on, and it really just gives you a sense of the scale of the protest, and also allows you to kind of almost immerse in the weight of the fact that these protests were happening across the country. So yeah, and then here you can see all the source material that I have. And yeah, I just want to reiterate for everything that I'm showing. So I guess this might be for folks who might be a little more technically inclined. Usually I think, yeah, for everything that I'm sharing today, and it's pretty much the case for all my projects that are digital, there's usually a link to the code that produced the particular visualization or sonification or interface. I generally like to work out in the open, almost as a way to kind of give back, because all my work is built on openly accessed material. So it's really just trying to kind of contribute back to the community for that. So the last thing that I want to share is a project I did at the American Museum of Natural History. I'll try to make this a little brief. That this is kind of like a bit of a rabbit hole here because there's a lot to unpack. But for those who have visited the American Museum of Natural History, this is the museum on 81st Street in Manhattan. It's a very old museum that was opened over 150 years ago, and it has a lot of old dioramas. It also has cultural halls, which are a bit controversial in the modern eye. As a place that has like fossils of animals. There's also dioramas of like cultures of people. The museum. I'm also kind of speaking as an individual, not as a employee of the museum right now. So just as a disclaimer. The museum has really tried to start to think about how they can kind of contextualize some of the older or outdated or offensive material that they have at the museum. So this is just an example of one of the dioramas that they have. This was made in the 1940s. And it contains a lot of inaccurate representations of American Indians, as well as a lot of kind of stereotypical ways of kind of showing different people. And one thing that they started doing was adding these kind of annotations on top of it, just to kind of kind of give kind of a modern context to trying to interpret these, and even just letting people know that this when and why it was created already tells you a lot, you know. So we wanted to, so my team at the museum, my team, we're called the Science Visualization Group. We're a group that tries to think about how we can use digital media in trying to, again, kind of add kind of new layers of context on top of the physical exhibits that, you know, might be pretty old or outdated. So this is usually relevant for, or, you know, historically we've done a lot of work with the science halls. So things like doing a exhibit on climate change, something that is constantly, you know, we're constantly learning new things. And unfortunately, we're constantly understanding, you know, new consequences of climate change and things like that. So it's beneficial to have a digital medium to be able to in order for it to be updated constantly, as well as things like astrophysics, where you know the science is always new. We're always learning new things. But I was interested in kind of the cultural halls. It is a bit of a sensitive topic to the museum for obvious reasons. So I started with working with the library. So the museum has a research library, and they have a lot of great resources around accessing the library's, the museum's historic material. So this is just kind of a fun experiment. I was able to kind of pull together using their data. You could kind of like move through time. You kind of move through time, and then it'll show you at any given year. You know, you have the annual report of that year that you could actually click through and read. You have the particular floor plans of that year, any particular events that happened, the logo, historic images that were taken that year, as well as different expeditions that were created. So this was really just to kind of, you know, have a way to kind of look at the museum's history and the various assets that they have for different periods of time. Then we got a grant to work on a little more ambitious project around this. This was through a generous grant from the Knight Foundation. This tool is called Collection Scope. I don't think I have time to really kind of go really that deep into it, but I'll just kind of show you this video. So this tool allows you to explore hundreds of thousands of items in the museum's collection, in this case, the anthropology collection. And it allows you to do this through a 3D immersive space. So here I'm showing how you can kind of serendipitously kind of go through and kind of click through different items in space. But you could also visualize these items over space. So in this case, showing where these items were collected from. So you kind of see these really tall, let me just pause it here. So you can see these really tall, almost like skyscrapers of items from different countries in which we collected different material from. As well as you can look at these items through time. So this is kind of like a tunnel that you could kind of go through back and forward, and you can kind of go backward in time and see what's collected at that particular time. This is another view, which is also through time, but it's kind of breaking it up into the different cultural halls. So these 6 tracks correspond to the different cultural halls that we have. So you kind of get a sense of where these things were collected from over time. And then we had kind of some experimental things that we were able to kind of use virtual reality to immerse yourself in these collections. So I wanted to, and this kind of shows that this is an open source project. So you can, again, you could use this for your own collection of materials. But I wanted to leave enough time for questions. So I'm just gonna stop it there for now. And then just take a look at the chat to see if I can kind of go deeper on anything or answer any particular questions. So Sarah, Linda, or Bridget, were there anything that stood out? Sorry, I can't hear. Sarah, Linda, you're muted.
Of course, of course. But it was I just found it very interesting. This is a really general question, and then there were some questions about the specific projects. But Rhonda asked, what is the first question you ask when given a project or data set? Where do you start your decision on how to depict the data?
Yeah, that's a great question. And unfortunately, the answer is always different. So like, just say for the example, for a data set, I think typically what I do, I do one of two things. I kind of just like try to do kind of what I call like pre-visualizations, just like try to be able to visualize the data myself just to see if there's anything interesting in it. It's usually like an anomaly. Another way of looking at it, it might be like a story. It might be something, kind of a human element that might be interesting. So it would be looking for these maybe anomalies or different patterns that might be happening, and that creates questions like why is that happening? So that allows me to kind of go a little deeper, and there might be kind of a story there, and I like to try to center it around the human experience, like the topic of this presentation, but really looking for that story that might be interesting that other people can connect to. And I think that's the other thing that I think of is what is the experience of the person either watching or listening to this, and what is the experience they should have doing it. So in the case of the data music, it's thinking about like for income inequality, I want them to feel the contrast of income in New York City. But there's another song about like air pollution in Beijing, or there's another song about using brainwave data of a patient with epilepsy. So the question is like, what should the listener take away from this, or what should the experience be like? For the case of like the air pollution data, like maybe they shouldn't feel comfortable. Maybe it shouldn't be like a pleasant song. Same thing with the song using brainwave data of a patient with epilepsy. If the goal is to kind of create empathy, it might, you might want to try to make a song that might be a little uncomfortable at a particular time. So that's kind of also what I think about is the end user, so to speak.
So I do want to get to the previous questions, but I think this question from Kozak speaks to along a similar vein in terms of the subjectivity that's involved in the creation. He asked, has there ever been a time where you find your own unintentional bias was challenged in one of your projects? How did you navigate that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's always it's definitely a challenge with this type of work for sure. I mean, I think as I mentioned with the data-driven DJ things, like anything that's like that requires creative decisions, a lot of times have unintended consequences. And even if we're talking about bias, like, there's always bias in data visualization. there's always bias in even just the existence of a data set, right? Like somebody decided that this thing should be kept track of. There's also bias in how things were collected, things like that. So I think to kind of sidestep the question a little bit, like I think that it really hasn't informed my work in wanting to not only kind of do these things that are kind of using data and you know, things like that, but I'm very interested in things like data literacy. And I think that's part of why I make my things open source, is because, yes, I have my own biases. I made these particular decisions. I want to make them as transparent as possible. So I'm going to show you the actual code that I wrote myself, that outlines these particular decisions, and I try to document it using words as well, and pretty good detail. So at the very least, like, you know, the decisions I made, and then you could agree or disagree with them. And I think it's great. It's great if you disagree. I think that's part of what art is about. But I think that's why I felt it was important to really just make sure that both my process and the actual code was open and freely available to people, because again, I think it is a little easier for me to sleep at night, I guess, like when at the very least, like I can tell people what my decisions were, and just have that process transparent, you know, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, you're allowing people to enter into a debate with you because you're providing them with the same data set and they could come to a completely different conclusion.
Yeah, and I think the great thing with code in this example is that I can say, yeah, like you can make it better, or we can work together to kind of fix it. I think that's like the cool thing about like the digital medium, is that, you know, they're not like a painting. You know, I can make new iterations of it, and can evolve it and adapt it pretty easily. So
okay, so I'm going backwards in time, and then we'll go forwards again. There was a specific question, I believe it was about the sound of movement. Sorry. Is this me? Okay, sorry about that. About the sound of movement from Antoinette, who asked, how long did it take you to complete this? It is a very powerful presentation. And there were a number of comments certainly about the power of that presentation.
Yeah, how long did that take me? I want to, so first off, that was a personal project. That was just kind of a side project. I felt compelled I needed to kind of do something, because I felt a lot around that time. I feel like most of the work was around just getting all of that material, because compared to a lot of my other projects where I usually can kind of access a readily made data set, in this case, I had to kind of build it myself. I had to kind of, you know, try to find video documentation of all the different protests that were happening across the country. So I feel like a lot of the work was around that, and that might have taken on the order of weeks, I would say. The visualization itself wasn't too difficult, I don't think. Mostly because I've created my own tool set that allows me to, you know, kind of generate interfaces like that pretty easily. So the interface itself didn't take a while, but I think getting all the material probably took a few weeks at least.
And actually, Marilyn asked, can you expand the circle and listen to all the protests at once?
Well, that's a good idea. You unfortunately you can't do that. I think that was both a technical and a creative decision. The technical one being that, yeah, it's just a lot of media to kind of have in the browser. So it might be hard to kind of do a lot of the simultaneous things, but it's
Mm.
also extremely overwhelming to listen to all of them at once. But I think it would be very powerful to listen to everything at once. I actually think I did try that. I might have a recording somewhere but I think it's just like it's just noise.
Yeah.
But I think it would be cool. I think maybe in like a virtual space where you have kind of like 3D sound, we could kind of have it surrounding you rather than like, you know, just all in your in the same place in your ear.
Yeah, you know, and on the other hand, Kozak said he loved that the information is listed by and linked by state as well. So you have, you know, you're moving and you're situated. Okay, let's see. I think this now we're back to the two trains. Rhonda thought it would be interesting to layer population density with the income information. Interesting.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of other types of data I would love to overlay on top of this. I think after the pandemic, or you know, after kind of the effects of the pandemic, I think it'd also be interesting to kind of see ridership along the New York City subway in this way, because I think it's almost kind of like the inverse of it. You know, or
Right.
especially during the pandemic, where, you know, the so-called essential workers were most of the ones riding the subway, and they'd be more likely, you know, from the outer boroughs that in this case were the part of the quieter parts of the song. So it would almost kind of be kind of this flipped thing. But yeah, I think part of the challenge of these types of visualizations is like trying to figure out how to keep like cutting down things, because like I think when I started this particular song, like I wanted to incorporate so many different dimensions of data, because you know, again, it's a very complex topic. So I think it's from a from like an academic point of view, I think it is important to you know, try to bring that complexity out. But in this case, like when you're working with sound and music, it's hard to add more dimensionality, especially when there isn't any standard language for audio. And it's a little harder to do kind of multi-dimensional audio. So this would be the equivalent of like showing like a say like think about like what a map, like a colored map would sound like in a song. Like the problem is that a song is linear. So it's a bit harder to add more dimensions to it. And that's part of why I used the New York City subway, because that it's a line. Yeah, and I was able to kind of use that as a way to move through the data via song. So
well, that's in a way why the roller coaster was so interesting.
Right. Exactly.
So Sarah asked, can you show us the global refugee movement sonification too?
Yeah.
She's thinking of new projects for you. Maybe you've done it. No.
Yeah, so that was another data-driven DJ project. Let me just quickly pull it up.
Oh, it was over on the side there. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Good call.
Yeah, I could just show a brief snippet of it. Let me just do this again. Okay. So this song is a lot of data. I wanted to kind of update this because there's been a lot more movement since I did this, because this data ends at 2012. But basically what this song does is it tries to turn refugee movement into song. So it takes the country of origin and the country of destination, and turns that into sound. So we're starting in the 70s. So basically the rule here is that the farther you move, the longer and lower the pitch of the sound. So we're gonna see like starting, I think probably in like the 90s, you're gonna see a lot more globalization and a lot more movement across continents, which would create a much kind of layered, deeper song. So here's where the kind of song swells, because people are moving across the ocean. This is almost also a song about globalization as well. I think it's also the sounds that you're hearing. I took inspiration from American country music, which is often uses kind of nostalgic lyrics as well as nostalgic sounds, longing for home, longing for the country, things like that. And again, I'm thinking just what is the feeling that people should have when listening to this? I think something like nostalgia is probably the appropriate emotion, as well as referencing things like the using instruments like the steel guitar, which kind of sounds like the crying human voice, so just trying to think critically about how to translate this very kind of heavy data set into a song that might hopefully would be appropriate for it.
It's interesting. John Kelly, who brought the Philip Glass connection into the chat, mentioned that his students, I believe he's at Columbia, have to compare the Green Book route between two cities to a Google Maps direct route and contemplate the injustice in the different routes. And he sent kudos to you and the New York Public Library
Nice.
For the use of the data. And it seemed exactly like what, you're really thinking along exactly the same lines. So
yeah, that's a great, that would be a great addition to that interface, is just showing the difference, showing kind of a contemporary route, and even just giving just basic statistics about it, like a difference of like, I don't know, 1,000 miles or something, whatever it is.
It was pretty dramatic having to skirt Texas in that way.
Right.
Yeah. So okay, now I'm going. Oh boy, there's a lot. Okay. Jane asked, do you ever revisit your projects and realize that you could get another set of responses to your work? She said, to me, the subway song makes money speak, but what else can you get from it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do often revisit my old work. And I think, again, that's kind of the benefit of using this particular medium, is because, even in this case, like I think I usually revisit things just to update them, because in that case, I wanted to kind of hear, using the latest census data, what this would sound like. Same thing, I did another project about climate change, is the climate change coloring book. Again, I'm interested, there's always new data coming out. So I always want to try to revisit, just to kind of see if anything changed, kind of using the same algorithm, but just updated data is kind of interesting. I'm also I generally like to keep a lookout for people who use my code, but for completely different data sets. I've seen that happen before. I think that produces very interesting results. And I think that's another benefit of kind of having things open source in my case, is that, I don't know, or I mean, you know, if you just think of like the reasons why libraries and museums exist, I mean, there's an infinite amount of unintended creative consequences of kind of having things out in the open. So it's really cool to see new things being made that I wouldn't have ever dreamed of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's I'm aware, you know, of the time, Brian. There's so many wonderful comments and questions. I'm going to try and just home in on the questions, and I thank everybody for the kudos are just rolling in, and the thanks for the wonderful talk. Marilyn asked, were the trains and protests solitary projects? Do you also do collaborative projects like these?
Yeah, typically my personal projects, my side projects are just myself. And the bookend projects, so the one I did, the American Museum of Natural History, and the one at the New York Public Library, those are extremely collaborative. And that's typically how I typically do work, is that I think the personal projects, it's not that I need for me to do it alone. I think it's more of, I guess I just, like first just need a space to experiment and explore and learn and develop on an individual basis. And for me, it's just easier just to kind of do it. And it also just allows me to just constantly just be learning new things. Often these things start with just me just wanting to learn something. Like the data music project, that really just started from me just wanting to learn how to make music, because I don't really have a music background, but I love music. But then I'm like, how do I make music? Okay, I have a computer science background, so maybe I'll just try to, you know, use data sets and algorithms to do it. And that's kind of how it was made. So it really starts with just like me wanting to learn something for my side projects. So typically those are alone. But yeah, the work I do at institutions are extremely collaborative, almost to like a fault. Just because, you know, when you work with these really large institutions, you know, very naturally you just have so many, so much expertise, and you know, it's amazing resources to pull from. So it's almost kind of overwhelming, the amount of things you could pull from. So they're kind of like the two different outlets that are kind of on the opposite spectrum.
And this, I think, you know, I think you've more than touched on this question that Kozak posited, but he did ask, you know, how do you choose the tones and sound for a given data visualization? Is it through your own personal lens, or do you consider audience or historical context in the sonic choices you make? And I think you did talk about that with folk music, and you know, thinking about home and being displaced.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to add about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage you to check out the website, because there's like paragraphs that kind of go through each individual decision that I make. So I would gladly talk about it here, but I think that's probably the most accurate thing, because I did that project like many years ago. So that's like probably the most, again, that's like another good part about, for me, documenting my work, because that's usually how I remind myself how I actually did it. But yeah, I think the short answer is it is really thinking about both trying to make the right match between the material, the source material, the source data set, and the experience of the listener, like trying to match those two things. And it is very opinionated, because this is kind of like a creative endeavor. But yeah, I have to make certain decisions of like, this is what I think the audience should feel when listening to this data set. But all of that is documented on the website.
Yeah. It's such incredible generosity in, you know, what your form and content are completely in harmony in what you're doing. And I just really admire it. I hope I didn't miss any questions. Bridget, did you see anything that was overlooked before we conclude the program? No, I think, yeah. And again, thank you all so much for your comments and your kudos. I just have to mention that our colleague Laura Vukal said that the math, the connection with math really made sense to her for the first time through these these demos. So thank you so much. I mean, your vision, your insight, and, you know, sharing your art with us this evening. It's just been wonderful. And I also want to thank, Bridget, my colleague, whom I'm trying to unmute as we speak there. Again, I do want to thank Art Bridges for its very, very generous support of this evening's program and all the programs having to do with landscape art and virtual travel, which it's an exhibition that has inspired many, many people, even during COVID. Everyone who's visited has been moved by the concept of virtual travel, which your work personifies. And that exhibition is on view. We're in our final week, pretty much close to our final week. Yes, it's on view just through February 6th. So if you haven't seen it yet, we invite you to the museum and hope you can catch it, because it's really a wonderful exhibition. I just want to thank everybody for joining us. And once again, Brian, thank you so much. I feel this is really the tip of the iceberg. You know, I want to bring you back to see more of your projects. Thank you. And thank you so much to the audience. Thanks for joining us. And please share your thoughts with us about this program, about other programs, and about programs you'd like to see. We're there and we're listening. So once again, everybody be well. Happy New Year. And thank you again. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Brian.